Good evening and welcome to this evening's panel, Managing Information and Player Attention in Investigative Horror. I'm Heather Miller, moderator for this panel. Before our panelists introduce themselves, I'd like to thank the Good Friends of Jackson Elias for hosting this Weekend with Good Friends on their Discord server. Interested listeners can find more information at blasphemoustomes.com. Our panel's topic is managing information and attention, how to balance clues, red herrings, and pacing to keep players engaged without frustrating them. And now our panelists. Sue.
Hi, I'm Sue Savage, she, her, and I write investigative scenarios for quite a lot of different games and in quite a lot of different genres as well. I'm also the author of Matrons of Mystery, which is a Brindlewood Bay-based cozy mystery RPG. You can find some of my stuff, including my scenarios for Liminal and Cthulhu Dark, on DriveThruRPG. And I'm also around the internets under the name Savage Spiel in various different places.
Thanks. Keris.
Hi, I'm Keris McDonald. I work at Chaosium, where I am the line editor for the Call of Cthulhu, Cthulhu by Gaslight line, which is the Victorian setting. And as well as those books that have been coming out recently, we've just produced, I have to get this on, Sutra Pale Leaves is coming out. This is one of my babies as well. I edited this one. I started tabletop role-playing in 1981, I think. It's a very long time ago. I'm a LARPer. I've run games for 11th Hour, Gothic, Doctor. My LARPing style is hit things with rubber swords, really, but I also do a lot of investigative stuff now that I'm older. And you can find me on Facebook. And if you want to read some of my short stories, you could try checking out my mythos stories in the private life of elder things, which is an anthology, a 3-author anthology, I mean.
Leslie.
Hello, I'm Leslie Horn, or you may know me around the internet as XPLovecat. I am a developmental editor and book coach for tabletop role-playing games and fiction, mostly in the fantasy, sci-fi, and horror genres. And I also have a YouTube channel where I talk all about role-playing games. So talking about GM tips, player tips, but also going through scenario reviews, and I have quite a bit on horror role-playing games. That's mostly what I talk about, Call of Cthulhu, some Cyberpunk Red, Boston, some really good stuff. So that's where you will find me if you want to learn more about role-playing games.
Thank you all. This panel is advice on
Lydia
ways
didn't go yet.
I'm sorry. I'm just sorry. I skipped over you, Lydia. I'm so sorry. Go ahead, Lydia.
That's
so sorry.
okay. Don't
Sorry.
worry. Don't
Nerves.
worry. I
Ah,
have
nerves.
my there's some kind of invisibility spell I've been working on. Don't worry. The sun is coming down. Well, hi everybody. I'm Lydia. It's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for tuning in. I am a Call of Cthulhu podcaster, and I co-manage the actual play podcast Lightless Beacons. We launched last Halloween, and we're currently midway through our second season. Right now, we're playing The Moonchild by Paul Fricker. And you can also find me at the Miskatonic Playhouse, where I'm a regular cast member. Most recently, you can hear me fighting for votes for women, as along with battling the mythos in A Midsummer Night's Darkness. And before that, in the long-form Cthulhu by Gaslight production, Mr. Whisper, which is a lot of fun. Come and listen to that one.
Thank you, everyone. This panel is advice on ways to dole out information and keep your players engaged with your game. It's intended for both those who are new to running games and anyone who thinks they could benefit from some advice. We're hoping to share techniques on creating a dynamic, interactive experience that encourages role-playing discovery. We're dividing our discussion into several sections, so let's get right into it. Let's talk about clues, one of the defining characteristics of investigative horror. The 3-clue rule, courtesy of Justin Alexander, is commonly used by keepers to help players find clues. What strategies do you use to make finding clues engaging? What kind of clues have you used that go beyond the simple journal in a desk drawer? And what was your favorite moment of clue discovery during a game? Keris, please kick us off.
Do I have to answer all three at once?
Answer anything that occurs to you about the clues or anything else.
Right. So the 3-clue rule, I think, probably is worth explaining, and the way that it written in a very good blog post is basically that when you're writing a scenario, you should think about the revelations that the investigators need to realize, that the things that they need to know. For example, that they're facing werewolves, that the werewolf is attacking its ex partners or girlfriends or whatever, those sort of things. And each of those revelations ought to have 3 different clues that you can access it, 3 different ways of finding this information out. So no matter how much the players mess up, or if they go off in the wrong direction, or they just don't bother tossing the room properly, or they fail all their skill rolls, they should have a chance of getting to the clue and the revelation that's important to the plot. So that was the Alexandrian suggestion, and actually I think it's really good. At Chaosium, I know one of the things we're always told is do not hide a plot point behind a skill roll. This is really important to you. There's got to be a way for the investigators to get to it, even if they fail their skill rolls. And, you know, there are ways of, depending on the system you're running, there can be ways of getting around skill rolls. You might be able to like roll again, do a pushed roll, or there might be idea rolls, which allows you to make a much easier roll and the player to give and the keeper to give you a really big hint. But generally speaking, major plot points, don't hide them behind skill rolls. That's the line we take at Chaosium. So yeah, if you're going to do investigate, you cannot block them. A clue should never be an actual gate that can be blocked and stop the plot going forward. That's the general idea. And my particular take on clues is making props. You call me an old LARPer, but I think things that you can touch. If it can be a handout rather than something the keeper reads out, give it to them as a handout, and give it to them as a handout that's on an appropriate style of paper in the right handwriting, and maybe in an envelope, and maybe sealed with sealing wax or that sort of thing. So something they can touch, something they can interact with, something they can use their senses. In a lot of ways, talking at people is the hardest way to engage people. So yeah, that would be my starting point.
So I can go into a little bit of, I'll start with my story of my favorite clue discovery during a game because it leads into some advice. So I had a game that I ran where the cultist took someone's eyeball, and that eyeball then had to travel to the cultist's lair, and the player who no longer had that eyeball then got visions of where they were going. So they were able to get some clues of like, okay, they're traveling through the mountains. They're traveling past this specific village that we've been to before. And that's a way to give clues that's very interactive and fun and different. But it was a very interesting way to kind of give that information to them. So that's an example of a different way that you can provide clues, would be either visions or dreams. We all love good dreams. So I think that's always a fun way to kind of insert some clues. And then I would also say, don't forget about your actual environment. So blood stains, dust, anything that you can put in a room that could lead to different information could be a helpful way. So I think what Keris said about the handouts is awesome. And you can have those physical clues, but also think about how you can utilize the setting in the descriptions of your setting to filter out some of those clues. And then the last thing I'll say on this is that I also really like clues that force your players to have to make a decision about whether it's worth it to get that information or not. So a very real way of doing this with game mechanics would be if you're playing a Call of Cthulhu game, you can get this information from a book, but it's going to cost you 1d10 sanity to do so. And that is a way that spices up getting clues. That's not just make a spot hidden roll. Yeah, you find a piece of paper, which it can work. That's fine to do from time to time, but keeping in mind different ways of how you can filter out information that keeps it spicy and fun and different for players, I think is always important to think about.
This image of an eyeball traveling on a subway car and then in a bus, and then
Yeah.
up to the lair.
Exactly. Oh, we changed bus stations. Where are we going now?
Rail replacement bus if it was traveling in the UK, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay,
One of my
Sue,
favourite types of clues is a dead body. That's partly just because I grew up watching murder mystery shows, but also when there's a dead body, the players are always going to go and have a look at it. You don't have to worry too much about them ignoring it and going and doing something else. And they'll ask questions, and this is a great time to throw lots of information at them. And yeah, when it comes to making skill rolls to find clues, I think there's always lots of options other than you don't find anything on a failed roll. It's one thing I learned from Liminal. It had a whole list of suggestions for what happens on a failed roll. So it could be it takes you a long time. It could be that you get hurt in some way or you attract unwanted attention.
Mhm.
And my favourite one of these was when they were going through someone's computer looking for information. Fumbled the roll. So they did find the information, but in the process of finding it, they had to go through an awful lot of truly upsetting werewolf erotica. So they had all lost
you
a bit
have a
of willpower
handout?
by the end of it.
Do you have a handout for that?
Read this novel.
I've seen far too much of it on Facebook. And something else I like to use as a clue is Wikipedia pages, because I run a lot of my games in the modern day, and it's often based around real places or people. And if they've got a Wikipedia entry, then it's quite fun to just send someone the link and say, here's what you discover.
Nice. I like that sort of breaking the fourth wall aspect there. Something that I really like, again, sort of breaking the fourth wall, is when a real life puzzle has to be included in some way and the players have to actually do something out of character. Cat Clay's Miskatonic Repository scenario, The Well of All Fear, has a really great clue, which is literally a block puzzle. I'm not going to say too much about it because spoilers, but you literally have to do a block puzzle and decipher a code as part of the plot and as part of the clues. And I think just the occasional use of something like that can really sort of freshen attention as well in a way, because you have to use a different sort of focus and a different part of your brain and come out of character to really do this thing on the table or the computer screen, whichever world you're playing in. So I think something really innovative like that can really make a difference to a scenario.
If you're doing a seance, say, why not use a real Ouija board and they have to follow the planchette as it goes across and spells things out. I
literally own a Ouija board for exactly that purpose.
Yep.
Oh, nice.
If they're finding stuff out in books about, some something that's sort of real world, and you happen to have a lot of books, or you've got access to a library with some decent old books, give them the actual book with a bookmark in it. You find this is what you find out about the cult of Moloch, or child sacrifice in ancient Celtic religion or whatever. So you give them the actual thing so they can find it in big old musty tomes. That's terrific.
I like what you said earlier, Keris, about how handouts can really sort of engage the senses as well. Obviously, it's something you can only do in real life, but I remember a clue I once gave my players. I have a very large perfume collection. I love collecting perfumes. And I had my sort of big bad character. She was an anatomist. She was a resurrection man. well, resurrection woman. And so she used to wear very heavy rose perfume to cover up the smell of formaldehyde. And I had them find a clue, which was a lace-edged handkerchief. And I absolutely soaked it in this really dark rose perfume I have and gave it to them and said, you remember this scent. And then later on, when I said, oh, yes, you find a cloak hanging up in the lab and you smell a dark rose perfume. And so it's like, oh, that handkerchief. Smell it again. That's it, isn't it? This is hers. This is her lab. And that's how they found what they were looking for. So, yeah, the senses and bringing people out of what they expect, I think, can be really effective sometimes.
It's interesting how the things that each of you are talking about also build atmosphere. Um, how do you see that relationship between offering clues and creating atmosphere for your players?
I think
Pick on
it's,
some.
yeah, I think it's like, they seem to meld in my mind as one thing. Like, I don't think I separately think about both of them, because they inherently go together. Like, when I'm thinking about how to present a clue, it's in the vein of how can I present a clue atmospherically. Like, it's all in one for me, I think, when I'm planning those things out.
Do you uh, and this may be an artificial question, but do you most often start with a clue? Do you most often think about the atmosphere you want to create? What's a clue that I could use to do that that would also work with the story? I mean, do you have a particular process?
Well, I would say for me, I mostly run pre-gens these days, so that work is pretty much done for me in terms of the actual clue giving. So more of the heavy lifting is done on the atmosphere because I have the clue and I have hints to the atmosphere in the pre-generated scenario. And so it's just coming up with in my mind, how am I going to describe that to my players and present this in a way that fits with the tone that I'm aiming for.
Anyone else have thoughts on clues and atmosphere?
I think the time period you're running the game in is a big part for that, because most of mine are modern day, so I am focused a lot on things like web pages and Google Maps, because they say that does kind of create the atmosphere of the modern day, because everyone is walking around with a phone these days. So I've used a completely different approach if I'm doing some Edwardian horror.
It was mentioned earlier, environmental storytelling, and Sue, you mentioned with a dead body is a really good place to find clues. But yes, it was already said earlier with the dust and anything around the room, and just those descriptions, I think, of the room that you're in can really make a difference. And making things vivid, I think, concentrates the mind as well of the players.
One of the things I've discovered recently is I'm in a game. It's not an investigative game. It's Pendragon. So we're playing squires who are going to be knights one day. And for me, it's really easy. The GM just has to say, right, you're on your horses and you're riding through woods and you're looking for Saxons, and I can see it. I can smell the wood. I can see the way the light comes through the trees. I know what the horse smells like. I can feel the saddle, the leather, and that's me. I think really sort of as if I'm there. I'd found out very recently that my other two fellow players are basically aphantasic. They don't see pictures at all. And I'm not entirely certain how they role play, because they see it all in abstract terms. They don't have a visual picture of the scene, and I think that's really interesting how different people how they're going to access the game as sort of imaginatively when they see things in very abstract ways, or they think of things in very abstract ways, and I literally see and feel it as if it's a visual thing, as if it's there in front of me. So I don't know. So clues and description would have to take into account that different people have different cognitive ways of entering into the game. We don't all think the same way.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. How would all of you, if you found out that you had a player or going into a scenario, knowing that you had one or more players who had aphantasia, how would you change your clue delivery, so to speak, strategy to accommodate, to bring them in?
I think that would have to be an out of game conversation before we started and find out what works for them, what works for the individual. If I've met anybody with aphantasia, I'm not aware of it. If I've ever played a game with somebody with it, again, I'm not aware. So I think I'd really want, if I was keeping for somebody, to find out what works for them. What do they need from me? What adjustments do I need to make? And if I describe, as you were saying, Keris, the light dappling through the branches and these wonderful English oaks, and you can smell the smell of rain. Does that actually mean anything to them? Does it work for them if I describe it, or does it not? What do they need from me, I guess, is the question. It's sort of part of a general session zero if it's a longer campaign. More challenging in a one shot, especially if you don't know the person. But yeah, I think it's always worth just taking 5-10 minutes before you start to find out if there's anything that you need to do differently.
Well, if you were at a con and running a game at a table full of people you don't know, but one person speaks up and says that, you're going to take them aside and have that conversation when you have the time pressure of a con
Yeah, it's
game. I mean,
difficult in the moment, isn't it?
yeah.
Very difficult.
Maybe maps could be a useful tool in that situation. If you, rather than relying on them picturing things, make sure that everything is sort of there in front of them, written, mapped out, and using figures to move so that everybody can see where everybody relates to each other on the board, as it were.
Yeah, and if you're at a con, like you can do real simple piece of paper, pencil, like you don't have to be prepared for this situation, but you can put X's where people are, draw a little bush and be like, that's where they are. And I think to your question of, well, would you have that conversation? If that person's offering that information at the table, it's probably, there's a reason that they're probably offering that information. And I think it could be a quick 2-minute conversation of, would it be helpful for you if I bring up a picture on my phone when I talk about something to help you visualize? Or is there anything that you would like from me that will be helpful for you? And then they can present that information.
That would be super, super helpful. Very accommodating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I have run games for people with aphantasia before, and generally it just seems to work out.
Mm-hmm. Because that's just how they live their life. So
Yeah,
they're used to.
It's what they're used to.
Yeah.
It's trying to make games
Okay.
accessible for everybody, isn't it? Whether it's a question of sensory loss or aphantasia or whatever it is, it's making adjustments so everybody has a good time.
Mm-hmm.
This actually gets me thinking about hybrid games. I don't know if any of you run a hybrid in person and online type of game at any point. I'm running a campaign right now that's a hybrid campaign. Anybody doing that or has done that?
What do you mean by hybrid?
I've got some people in person and I have some people online in the same game. Yeah, that requires accommodation.
Yeah.
I send maps. I create a folder with all of the maps, and I ask them, please don't look at the maps until I call out the number, knowing that they're going to go through and look at every single map. And they're gamers. What? I would do that. But there's finding accommodations for people. I think is one of those ground lines of just decency, right? In gaming, just a way to be decent to people. Yeah. Anything else on clues before we talk about working horror and investigation together? We can come back to it or revisit it if we need to. All right. Incorporating both horror and investigation makes scenario writing complex. How do you work horror and investigation together? How do you structure your scenarios so that you offer players a tight, internally consistent investigation? This is
It's
an intentionally broad question.
It's definitely a challenge, isn't it? And for me, often I'll start with an idea, which then sort of springs into a vague storyline with set pieces that I want to include. And then the actual game itself will build from that. In terms of internal consistency, something I think I like to remember is about playing fair with clues. And what I mean by that is I think you can illustrate it by looking at some different classic mysteries. If you compare Agatha Christie to Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, because now I love Sherlock Holmes, absolutely love it. One of the great classics of the genre. But the reader, when you're reading a Sherlock Holmes story, you're a passive observer, as is Watson. You never get the chance to solve the mystery because Sherlock Holmes does not share the clues that he sees until he explains them. It's like, oh, yes, I see that you sat on the left hand side of the carriage and you come from a place with a particular kind of soil. But you never get the chance to hear that and to work out his thought process. You just have to sit back and go, oh, bravo, Holmes, bravo, as does Dr. Watson. But if you're reading either an Agatha Christie or a modern day murder mystery, it plays much more fair with you. So you can actually have a chance to work it out. So if it's a full-on investigation that you're writing, and if you want to really get the players to put some thought into that story, that's the challenge, is giving them enough information to have a fair chance of uncovering the mystery, but not spoon feeding too much and finding that balance. Because also, particularly with Call of Cthulhu, cosmic horror at heart is about the unknowable and not explaining absolutely everything and not presenting the final story on a plate all nicely mapped out. So yeah, it is a real challenge, I think, that everybody faces at some point.
Go ahead, Sue.
Yeah, I was going to say, when I'm working on a scenario, generally it's the investigation that comes first and the horror just emerges from the investigation. And for the structure, I'll look at one of the games that I own, which has got really good guidance on how to structure an investigation. And I've got 3 games in that list. That is Liminal, Faison, and Monster of the Week. Because the great thing in Monster of the Week is the concept of the countdown, which is what will happen if the investigators don't do anything. And that gradually builds up until some disastrous event, which you generally never get to if the players are even vaguely competent. But it's good to know what you're building towards. Faison also has a countdown in a very similar vein. And then both Faison and Liminal have a basic structure to build your investigation around. So you've got the initial hook that draws the investigators in. You've got the things that happened before that led to the hook. You've got some locations. Each of those locations are going to provide clues which will lead to other locations. And gradually you get enough pieces together that you get to whatever the final confrontation is. So if you're looking for guidance on structuring an investigative scenario, those 3 books are all well worth a read.
Very good. When I think about like the overall arc of a scenario, it's not just like a smooth arc. There are more like waves when we're talking about getting to the climax. So at first, that arc is going to be a little bit smoother with investigation, but the waves are things like encounters or horror tension building opportunities. And so as you're going through and thinking about how do I get to the climax, like that's where we're building to, you can think about slowly incorporating those encounters and horror moments and making them more frequent as you get closer to the climax. So it's combining the way that you're getting clues and investigation that at first might not be super horrific, but as you get closer and closer, it's ramping up and you have more of those waves until you get to the climax. That's kind of how I try to pace the scenario at the table, is thinking about like continuing to just up the ante a little bit and keep the overall big arc going, and the frequency of those more intense moments become more as you get closer to the climax.
If I'm writing a scenario, one of the things I find useful, or particularly for a campaign or an extended scenario, is start from the end, start from the final scene, or the setting for the final scene. It doesn't mean that you have to absolutely, sort of nail down exactly what the investigators are going to be doing, but say what is the bad guys' final scene? Are they going to like destroy St Paul's Cathedral, or sink, open a huge sinkhole under the Buckingham Palace, or something like that sort of thing. So you've got your final scene, right? How are we going to get the investigators there? What clue do they need to get them to that point? So you've got the horror built into the final scene, and then you can work backwards that way. And it also allows you to put foreshadowing in, because you know where you're going. So in some ways that's easier than starting off with, well, what's the first clue going to be that's going to pitch them into what's the hook going to be that's going to pitch them in? So start with the end one and work your way backwards.
You guys are using the language of fiction writing through all of this, and it's got me wondering, um, how much do you think, and in what ways, um, does, even if you've never written fiction, if you write scenarios, you already know something about writing fiction, right? Because it's the blend of technical writing and fiction. Um, how, in what ways are fiction writing techniques helpful? And then in what ways, or what techniques maybe um, are not helpful? What techniques do you need to let go of?
I can take this one because I spend a lot of time working with people who write novels and write role-playing games, and they are different skill sets and have a lot of crossover as well. So I would say the basic understanding of storytelling, it is innate in humans. Like because of our cultural way of sharing information and all the plethora of media that we're exposed to, even if you've never written anything before, you have an innate sense of how to tell a story and what a story arc is. So having that knowledge and that reliance on just what you know already is helpful for writing a scenario, because you can access those things like what is a character for your NPCs, and what is interesting about characters, and how can I write this general story arc. But the trap is making sure that you're not forcing players into doing specific things. So you might start with your story like you would similarly to writing fiction, and then you have to go back and layer in and say, okay, but what if my players don't do this? What if they decide to do this instead? And have more open-ended ways of getting to your end point of your scenario. So it's tricky, and I think that's what makes scenario writing really difficult, is because you do have to encounter and think about all the different human brains, and you won't get all of it because people are very creative, so you're not going to think of everything. But having guidelines to be able to get the GM back on the right track is the best that you can do.
I think one of the biggest differences between writing fiction and writing scenarios is that a lot of time, particularly in things like murder mysteries, which is probably the biggest kind of investigative fiction out there. Most of the time you've got one main character, and maybe you've got a narrator sidekick like Captain Hastings or Dr. Watson, but normally it's all about the one person. And you just don't have that most of the time in RPGs. You've generally got, say, 4 or 5 main characters. The other big difference is you've got a lot less control over what any of them actually do. They're going to take you by surprise. You need to be ready for that. And I generally have some kind of ending in mind, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's the one they're going to get. And I would recommend watching the previous panel on improv. So that was very useful from the point of view of dealing with surprise endings.
One of the participants, I thank you for that.
That's awesome. Oh, and also it can be really a simple thing, but if you are looking to write scenarios, watching the language that you use in your writing. So sometimes I'll see people say, when your players do this, and it's like, no, not when, it's if, because they might not. And so giving that kind of language just helps set the tone for the keeper or GM as well, to be like, oh, okay, I don't have to force my players to do this thing. It's just there for me if I need that support.
This is where the multiple clues does help, because it helps guide your investigators sort of towards the plot, hopefully.
And types of clue as well. I think that's one of the big differences between writing fiction and writing a scenario, is the interactive nature of getting some clues. Yes, you can hand people a handout and they find a letter or a journal, but then also talking to NPCs is something that you can't do when you're writing a story or writing a book. But then you also have that different perspective that the NPC might have on the events which have happened. Maybe some of them are lying. Maybe some of them are unreliable witnesses. But then that can also get very confusing and send players down the wrong path in a way that's disruptive, rather than this is a deliberate blind or a deliberate clue, the fact that they're lying and nobody realizes that they're lying. So I think there's a decision to be made about to what extent do you build the investigative nature and the horror itself in the nature of the clue itself, in how you work with that. I think a campaign that does clues very well in terms of marrying the horror and the investigative nature is Horror on the Orange Express. When you have handouts which are on bits of skin. So, I mean, that's can you get a more horrible link up between clue and horror?
How long it took me to make that at home.
Oh, what did you do? How did you do it?
I'm totally kidding. I did not do that.
No, I have seen a blog. I have seen a blog where people made physical handouts, and I honestly can't remember how they did the skin things. I think it was just like possibly latex for makeup, for stage makeup. I can't remember, but yeah, just kind of Google it. I'm sure you'll find.
Yeah, you could do like ballistic gel or something.
Yeah.
That's one good side of being a LARPer is you have all kinds of weird stuff in your house that you can use to make handouts. I have so much fake blood.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, so the game that Sue and I, brief diversion, the game that Sue and I played together at Chaos Con UK, Lost and Found by Stu Sellens of the Miskatonic Playhouse. Some of the most amazing handouts I've ever seen. They were so good and they were just so tactile. And yeah, they really, really immersed you in the story.
Stu does great handouts.
Really does. Really does.
For some reason, a couple of years ago, he wanted me to look at a section of a scenario that had a lot about railroads in it. I don't know anything about railroads, but I am an editor, so I'm happy to help him. But it was really interesting how he was incorporating all of that with the story. He's super good at that. Yeah. So yeah, something Lydia said about balancing the horror in the investigation in a clue. and we've kind of talked around this a little bit. What do you guys do when you're looking at this? What are some things you've done to build in both of those aspects? Because it's easy to get one and it's easy to get the other. But how do you weave both of those together? And, particular types of clues lend themselves better, whatever. What's your take on that?
I'm going to say again, you can't beat a dead body.
Where do you store it?
Yeah, there is so much potential for horror in a dead body, as well as just providing a ton of clues. There are so many interesting ways that this person could have died, and all of them are great for hinting at nasty things to come. One of my own scenarios, you find a body right near the start of it, and that body has been cut open, filled with stones, and then sewn up again. And that has always been a really fun way to start the investigation. As you straight away know something really horrible has happened here.
Yes, having.
Sorry.
Go, please. No, you go, please.
Horror on the Orient Express. I just wanted to say, without too many spoilers, I think one of the superb things about that campaign is the way it riffs on the theme, the horror theme, in so many different ways. And obviously, as you've already said, the theme is skin, and they use it in so many different ways for horrific effect and really clever sort of threats and monsters and just stuff that turns up, and until you get to the point where you're paranoid about anything that's made of leather or or fur or sort of, and that works really well. I think that's beautiful. It's just the way that they've put whoever all the scenario writers have put lots of thought into how we can work on this one theme and pull it apart in different ways. And yeah, that would be a good thing to bear in mind.
I had a question from the viewership audience, our friends. I hope there will be, this is from Thomas Yanu, I hope there will be tips on using contradicting information. I can hardly do that only by talking with specific players away from the table. If all players here, they'll always metagame in my case. Yeah, so how have you worked in contradicting information?
I'm inclined not to take people into other rooms for extended periods of time unless there's actually a break in play. I think it cuts the atmosphere if you take somebody away and start briefing them. The ones who are left at the table are going to start to look at their phones or wander off or whatever. So I'm not a big fan of giving people conflicting information in play. I have written games where people start off with conflicting information in their character briefs, and I think that can be really useful. That's the way to do it. When you give, if it's a pre-gen character or you're giving them a brief based on their role, you can give them that piece of information at the start, and then they can bring that into play as part of their role playing. Then they might be at odds with each other or attempting to do each other over or whatever. But I don't really think taking people out and telling them other stuff is a great idea for a live game.
I think there's some possibilities in giving people different information and them having to work out which is the true version, if either of them is the true version. But doing that round the table, as you say, Keris, because I think once you interrupt the flow of the game for more than, a mutually agreed 10-minute comfort break, I think it can make the energy flatten a little bit. So, you can give them the information, but maybe sow a few seeds of doubt in it. It's like, so you believe that this character is saying XYZ and you failed your power roll. You believe everything that they say. And then the other one, maybe they pass the power roll. You hear the same information, but you think there's something a little bit dodgy. You see their eyes flickering to the side a bit. So kind of then putting the onus on the players to work out where is the truth in the information that they've been given, but doing it where everybody can hear, I think.
I also think that's a really good opportunity for players to role play a little bit. So if they do get, even if metagaming is a thing, like, oh, okay, I failed my power roll, so I'm the one that's wrong. Sure, you might know that as the player, but being able to role play that at the table can be a fun experience. And so if you're at this particular person, if at your table you find that your players just kind of dismiss the information really easily, like maybe you could encourage some role play and be like, well, how would your player or how would your character interpret this information, and do a little bit more encouragement of that type of working it out among the characters, could be a good experience for your players.
Yeah. And who's to say that the failure is necessarily a failure of the story? As we were saying earlier, you don't lock really important information behind a pass or a fail. Maybe they failed the power roll, so they're actually seeing the truth because their mind has been opened a bit. They're receiving the message from Nylathotep or whatever. But if they passed the fail roll, then the mental wall had gone up and they weren't able to be influenced. Maybe, and that I think that can counter metagaming about, oh, I failed, so therefore what I hear must be a lie. So kind of playing with that expectation a little bit with the mechanics, I think can be a lot of fun. And as you say, lead to some really good role-playing opportunities.
I think it's always a lot of fun watching players trying to figure out which of them is actually seeing the truth, or if anything that they're seeing is the truth.
Yes, I watched, forgive me, but I watched a couple of Matt Mercer videos. He at one point he was talking about when you make a mistake as a game master, how do you fix that? One of his suggestions is because basically that's contradicting information. You've given them the wrong information about something, they know something else. His recommendation is let watch as they try to sort it out, and then you follow what they ultimately decide on, because it's your game and you can shape it as you want, and then nobody knows that you gave them bad information. They figured it out, and they got a new path and now they're on it. So is that something you guys have ever done?
Yeah, definitely. Sometimes the players at my table will have better ideas than I do or the book does that I'm running it from. And so then we'll end up going in a different direction because it sounds fun.
Oh, we got one more question from the chat, and this is from Miranda. Before newer GM, for a newer GM or experienced one, reading through a scenario with all these handouts and clues and things to remember, what tips would you have for them to help them parse through that information? What to focus on and what to maybe put on the back burner? And if you have ever played Master Nyarlathotep with the new H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society clue box, this is very, very difficult to do. It's very difficult to start parsing through all that information. But yeah, what do you guys do with this? This question is in the chat if you want to refer to it.
I am an inveterate list maker. I like to have a separate document up on my screen, which gives me a list of all the handouts and all the clues and sort of notes on the plot as it's going on, so that I can sort of mentally tick off what clues are going to be available in this location. And I'll often copy paste the handouts into that notes document just for myself, so that I don't have to keep flipping back and forth between the Discord screen and my notes screen. I like to have everything in one place, but that's me personally, so it may not work for everybody.
I write in margins. I know it's shameful. At least I do in pencil.
Cover your ears, Matt
Shame!
Sanderson. Cover your ears,
Shame!
Matt.
And I underline things.
Suddenly this panel has become a confessional. Everybody take Keris's hand. She's going through a difficult time.
Yep.
I'm sorry.
We're here to support you, Keris.
Yeah.
Yeah, no judgment. We listen. We totally judge. We do.
In so doing, how does that help you?
It helps you pick out it's like, or, you know, obviously the civilized thing to do is make bullet points in a separate document or on flashcards you can keep with you for each scene. These are the things I need to get across to people. These are the clues. This is this is the really significant NPC they must meet. That sort of thing.
As a player, or what would you recommend for players, helping strategies to help them parse, all this information that especially near the end game, when they maybe have a lot of things to look at and they're trying to decide what they should do to get to that end game?
Virtual whiteboards, they can be really helpful. This is something we use a lot on Lightless Beacons. We have Miro is a good one, Mural is a good one, where you can drop all the handouts and also put sticky notes up. It's usually ends up looking like a big conspiracy board with virtual red string, but come the end of the campaign, they're a thing of beauty. They are, and it's nice to look back and to think about, oh, that's how it fit together, and just all the sort of little silly notes that we leave in the margins of the whiteboard and the sort of the memes and the gifs that we put up. It's a lot of fun. It becomes part of the gameplay as well, that sort of a communal repository of information, but also just something which is fun to do as a group. It's very useful.
Yeah, when I played the Impossible Landscapes campaign, we had a massive Miro board with everything on it, and it was absolutely a horrendous conspiracy board by the end, partly due to the nature of that scenario and partly just because we were all like that as players. So I also use similar things when I'm running Matrons of Mystery, because it is structured so differently to your typical investigative scenario. So it is based on Brindlewood Bay, so you have a set of clues that the players are going to interpret themselves. I used to use Google Jamboard until that stopped existing, so I think it would have to be Miro now. But when I'm running it in person, I've got a set of white clean cards and I write all the clues down on the cards. And then you get the virtual whiteboard as they push the cards around the table. And so there's no reason you couldn't do that in a regular investigative campaign.
I think it's a little bit more easy to manage if you're running a one-shot, but if we're talking about campaigns, like for players, I've found myself as a GM or keeper having to point them gently in the right direction, and I would say that's an okay thing to do. Like if they don't remember something that will significantly help them on their path in the campaign, it's okay to be like, hint, hint, maybe look at what you found in the hotel in Chicago. Hint, hint. And so that kind of goes back to you as a GM, like how to manage all the different clues. At the table, before I would run a section of a campaign, I have the clues in a suspected order. Granted, we all know that it might not go in that order, but it's at least a reminder that you can just flip through them when they're beside you, it'd be like, okay, we haven't gotten to clue number 3 yet. You can always do a quick skim and remind yourself what that clue is about. And then it will be that physical reminder that we still have this stack of clues, and here is what I would like them to get during this scenario, which you could then access your bullet point list and maybe have a few that are bolded that are the most important ones, that they need this information to really get on path and get to the next location, versus ones that might not be bolded, that are optional clues that they might find elsewhere or that are integral to the core campaign.
And things like that, we were talking about aphantasic people before, things like that could be really, really helpful for them. You know, a tangible thing to lay out, a visual thing to look at. So have to try to carry all that stuff around in their heads. Yeah. Yeah, so we've sort of started hinting towards the next topic, which is pacing. How to, laying out clues in the right order and at the right time and everything. So investigative horror, possibly more than other types of role playing games, maybe depends on really good pacing, really tight pacing, because it helps keeps players' attention by varying the amount of type of tension in the game. What do you do? What are your recommendations for good pacing to keepers?
I'll go ahead and provide some information about how I guess I approach it at the table, which is different than what I do beforehand, because I talked a little bit already about the arc of a scenario and kind of how I would structure that beforehand. But when you get to the table, I think a really important piece of this is reading body language and paying attention to your players. So while you may have pre-planned that you're going to trickle in this information and they're going to talk to this NPC and then they're going to do this and find the blood stain over there, that might be not engaging for your players. And you can generally, especially with practice, read your body language and see, is everyone stacking their dice? Is everyone peeking at their phones? Is everyone doodling on their their papers? Like, these clues can give you indications of when you need to ramp up pacing, or when you need to, or if people are looking confused on the other end of things, maybe you're going too fast and you need to rein it in a little bit and give them more opportunity to explore what's happening. So this is a very nuanced skill that I think takes time to learn at the table, but it's something that you can practice, and that will give you an indication of how to adjust your pacing as you go. And I feel like this is something I'm constantly doing, is like mental check-ins. Like, I'm not asking myself the question, is everyone engaged? But that's because it's become a natural thing for me because I've been GMing for so long. Whereas if you're a new player, maybe you write reminders to yourself to check in and be like, does everyone look like they're having fun, and are they engaged? Yes or no? Is this an opportunity for me to adjust pacing? Yeah, so that's my take on it.
I'd like to plug a panel which took place yesterday, actually. Mr. Spike chaired a panel about the art of pacing and how to keep players scared and engaged in horror games. I learned a huge amount being on that panel from my fellow panelists, and all about how to structure tension, how to structure climaxes, when to sort of ease up on the gas and when to put the pedal down. So I definitely say check that out when that becomes available on demand. Something that we talked about in that panel last night was about, for me, when the plot hook takes a little bit of time to arrive, I like to start off by giving people a small detail that's a bit weird or out of place in the opening scenes before the big main first shock and first scare of the scenario arrives. The example that I think I talked about was in Mask of Desire. It begins, I won't give too many spoilers, but it begins when you're at a party and there is pipe smoke. There's a bowl of tobacco for people to help themselves to. So this sort of felt a bit weird because the players identified there was something different. It wasn't normal tobacco, but the player didn't know what it was. They thought it was something eldritch, and they thought it was something, I don't know, dried essence of great old one or something. It was actually opium mixed into the tobacco. But just by putting that doubt in their mind right at the very beginning before the plot starts, I think you can create an atmosphere of tension even before they know what's beginning to go on. So I think just starting how you mean to go on is a good way of creating a tension and creating that sort of tense atmosphere before things start, and getting them to doubt what they see, doubt what they hear, and really question the information that they're given.
I would like to say, as I go on, I'm becoming more and more of a fan of starting in media res. So start them. You are at a party. Not you have been invited to a party and you're all sitting around. I mean, if you're think back to say the X-Files or whatever, very few episodes will start with them sitting around the office and getting a phone call. It will start with them arriving at the site, they're doing the investigation or similar. So chuck the players in there, and then they will deal with it. They'll, and you can always backtrack a little bit. If they're saying, but have I brought my torch or my rope or my, you can always go back and you can use rolls to, you can assume that they brought stuff that would be appropriate, or you can make them do luck rolls to see if they brought something that might be a little bit off kilter, so you don't need to do all the build up. You can just start them in there. That's it. How are you going to deal with this situation? That gets the game going quickly.
For some of my scenarios, I've got a kind of out of character timeline. So I'm counting down to a specific incident needs to happen at a specific time. Let's see, if I'm doing a 4-hour scenario, there'll be a 2-hour thing that needs to happen. And no matter what else is happening in the game, that will happen. And in the particular scenario I'm actually thinking of, it's something I picked up from running Alien. Alien, again, talks about the structure of cinematic horror, which is you have the build-up, the tilt, which is where basically everything changes, and then your finale. And so I look at where the tilt is going to be. What is the moment when it goes from a bit weird to definitely awful?
All of this has gotten me thinking about the relationship among pacing, atmosphere, and attention, because those I think you have to have those working together, right? Bouncing off of each other to be most effective, would you say?
You're multitasking the entire time you're being a keeper for an investigative horror thing. I mean, yeah, you've got so many plates spinning all at the same time, and it is a skill, and all you can do is give it a go, and you'll get better as you go on, probably. So yeah, do it. And also remember, one of the things I was thinking about pacing for horror is to try. You can use different sorts of horror throughout, and that, although it keeps the sort of horror going, so you've got an exploration, sort of the fear, the tension there of you're exploring somewhere strange, or you've got bits of body horror, or you've got actual threat, there's action, there's a monster jumping out at you, or just somebody shooting at you from the dark or whatever. So there's all sorts of different types of tension that you can bring in to keep the pace going without avoiding it all being one note the entire time. So you've got the flow, you've got to change, and you can have creepy bits, you can have surreal bits. Keep it changing, keep it moving throughout, but it can all still be unsettling and horrific in that sense. I mean, for some people, being at a cocktail party can be really quite unnerving.
Yes, I really like what you said about changing things up. I think that's absolutely key. And I think that's also in a longer campaign. I think that's where side quests can be really, really helpful, because sometimes you can be focusing on that main thrust of the storyline for so long, and you just need a little bit of a palate cleanser. You just need a very short story, which maybe gives the players a quick win. You know, something where they can sort of not think what a gigantic task that they've got ahead of them. Maybe they just need to save this one person from being sacrificed, or find this one thing. You know, I think that can be really helpful sometimes. Taking a break from a long running slow burn can actually make people more focused when they come back to the main plot, I think, because that also gives you the atmosphere, the opportunity for change of atmosphere as well, I think, which can really help, like you were saying, Keris, different types of horror, different types of tension, just changing up the story a little bit. It's I think that can be a lot of fun as well. There's so many brilliantly written side quests in the big campaigns and their longer stories. So I always say don't skip over them. If you have any chance of playing them, please do so, I reckon.
Yeah, I think the updated version of Master Nyarlathotep does that very, very well. Their side
Oh, yeah.
scenarios are excellent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Be interesting in hearing in the moment when you're maybe narrating a shift in a passage, players are about to discover something or something like that. What are your techniques for modulating, downshifting, upshifting, creating tensions? What is in the moment when you're as you're describing something, what do you do to convey that to your players?
I think it can be useful to change your tone. So depending on what you're starting from and coming down to, like let's use the scenario of you're just walking through a house and then all of a sudden something seems off. My voice gets deeper, I talk slower. It's something that's a little bit subtle, but that gets people's attention because it's a change. And that's what you can utilize with your own body, is your body language, your voice and how it sounds and the pace of your voice can indicate changes in the scenario from the different emotions that you're looking for eliciting in your players.
100%. And I think there's a temptation sometimes to talk faster and to talk louder, but then that can just lead to chaotic energy where everybody starts laughing and shouting, and
Yeah.
you just lose control of the room. So, yeah, absolutely taking the register down, putting a bit more breath in your voice as well. That can really help. I
Mhm.
Yeah,
think.
I've had players tell me that the way I deliver the horrors in a very calm and measured way can actually be scarier than doing it loudly.
Mm.
And of course, if you are speaking in a low and measured way, it gives you the opportunity for a sudden jump scare.
Oh, I nearly got punched in the face once accidentally by jump scaring people in real life. It was nothing deliberate, you know, they were just not expecting it. And I just sort of got in their face, and they just kind of went like that and instinctively nearly got punched in the face. So yeah, that was not Call of Cthulhu. That was a neo-Victorian post-zombie apocalypse game called Unhallowed Metropolis. It was a side quest that I'd put into a game. I'd basically sent them down a mine, sent them down the mine to investigate a terrorist cell that was operating down there in this abandoned mine. And I gave them this little ghost story about a piece of real life horror, actually, because down in the coal mines in Victorian times, you used to have children working in the shafts, and they were called trappers, and they would basically sit there all alone all day. Keris, I'm sure that you've you're very, very familiar with this from Gaslight, all alone all day, just opening and closing trapdoors. And so I just kind of had them find the ghost of this little trapper who was just whimpering about the dark, I don't like the dark. And then he just got into the face of the players and just screamed, I don't like the dark, and vanished. And so, yes, that's how I nearly got punched in the face in playing on Hallowed Metropolis.
That's the risk you take being a GM. Sometimes
it is
physical harm might be included.
Yeah, you need a health and safety risk assessment, I think.
I mean, it's only fair you're killing their characters. You know,
Yeah,
you've got it coming.
Yeah, totally.
Keris, do you have anything else to add before we move on? Not to pick you out or anything. But...
No, I can't talk that.
All right. Okay, so our next thing, red herrings, everybody's favorite thing to love and hate. So we all know if you put out a red herring, your players will seize on it immediately. So do you even use them at all? And if you do use them, first of all, tell us what your secret is, because we all need to know. How have you been able to successfully show them to your players and then get your players away from them so that they stay on the correct track? Do you think they should even be used at all? And if you have used them, have you had to deal with player frustration?
Yeah, this is a intense question. And to assess whether you should include red herrings in your game, which to answer the question, should you have them? I think they do have a place, though sparingly. I would say you need to ask yourself two questions. The first is, how long do you want your game to be? And number two, how confident are you in your improv skills? Okay, so if you are running a one shot that is 4 hours long, I generally don't use red herrings. They're just not there. If I'm running a massive campaign, or even if I'm running a medium length campaign that's over multiple sessions, that there's some expectation that we can take a little bit more time and there's breather there. Yes, I think it's appropriate that you could include some red herrings. How confident are you in your improv skills? If you are a brand new GM and if you've never done this before and you're a little bit nervous and there's all these other things that you're trying to manage at the table, maybe don't have them. That's cool. You can include them later if you get to the point you're feeling more confident in your improv skills. And the reason why I say improv is because, like Heather was saying, yes, a lot of times your players will grab onto it and go in a wild direction that you don't expect, which can be a lot of fun. And so I think the most important thing to keep in mind if you decide, yep, I have room to do this in my game, and yes, I'm confident in my improv skills, then your red herrings need to at least have some benefit that makes it worth exploring. So if there's a piece of information that is not relevant to the main plot, or they think it's relevant to the main plot but doesn't get them in the right direction, that path still has to be fun and have some sort of engaging encounters that would avoid the frustration. So what's frustrating is if you get a red herring that is, Susie knows about this weird person that came into the shop the other day, and you go and visit Susie and she's like, oh, nope, I don't know anything. That's not fun. But if you continue down a path that has some engagement with that red herring, even if they get to the end and they realize this wasn't the right path, at least we had fun doing it. I think that's where you avoid some of the frustration that can happen with red herrings.
I think sometimes what works really well on paper, in the moment, maybe it doesn't quite feel right to do, or sometimes you feel like you want to dial it back a little bit as well. Anybody who knows me knows I love the Dreamlands, absolutely love that setting. And I've taken my players through a part of the Dreamlands called Zura, which is the land of lost dreams. It's the place where ambitions never come to pass, dreams that never came true. Basically, nothing can be achieved in Zura. And while you're there, if you have a desire and you're trying to follow it, you can't achieve it. Now, that also includes, can you find the clue that you're looking for on paper? And no, you can't, because Zora is the land of pleasures, unattainable and unattained. So in the story, they're looking for a particular NPC, but they can't find him because the goals cannot be achieved. And as written in the scenario, you're supposed to throw horrible vignettes at them about failure, about everything that people in history have tried to do and failed to do. Like you see Leonardo da Vinci trying to do a flying machine, which eats him, basically. All these sort of very weird, nightmarish things. And you're supposed to just keep throwing them at the players until they give up and until they say, I don't know what to do. I honestly don't know how to make progress. Let's just have our investigators wake up, go back to the waking world, and then we'll try something else. At that point, as written, they find who they're looking for because they've given up. Now, on paper, I absolutely love that. But I felt in the moment that it sort of crossed the line of manipulating players, wasting their real lifetime, and also the danger of maybe losing focus, losing enthusiasm for the story. So I dialed it right back. I still used it because I really loved it, but I changed it and I did it in a different way, which was they met a completely different NPC who wanted them to stay in Zura because he was very lonely and he had no friends, because Zura is not a very nice place to be. But because that was what he wanted, it could not be achieved. Therefore, he could show them to the NPC that they were actually looking for. So still using that mechanic, still using that red herring idea as written and the false trail, but just doing it in a different way that wasn't going to impact on the experience of the players out of game. And so having demonstrated that, I then used it again, but in a much lower stakes way. It was just a door that they had to get through, but I just made them say that they had to clear their minds in order to get through it. And I did that via a power roll, essentially. And so that they didn't know what was on the other side and they didn't want to know where they were going, then they could progress. But hopefully, if you lay that groundwork and have the foreshadowing, they work that out for themselves. So you don't need to rely, as we were saying earlier, about don't lock essential things in a plot behind a skill roll. And it's important to maintain goodwill, I think, when it comes to red herrings. I think they can work really well and false trails, but as long as everybody's having fun with it. And I think if they're getting frustrated and you're getting frustrated, it's time to give up on that mechanic.
I'm not a fan of red herrings. I don't think they're usually necessary because the players are gonna come up with so many different wild ideas anyway that you don't need to lead them down a false trail. The exception I can think of is if you're going to use a red herring for a horror result, in that, you know, they frame or they kill the wrong person because they've decided that this guy's the baddie and we're gonna get him, and then once that's been done they realize no, they've messed up, they've really screwed this one, and they need to make things right, or they need to make up for it and find the real villain of the piece. That's an exception. I think maybe you could use red herring. You'd have to be really careful how you did it. Yeah, you can't lead them by the nose. It's still got to be their decision, because you can't make them think things. But if they choose to follow that line, use it for a horror effect.
Yeah, I think about the nearest I've come to using a red herring is one of my scenarios where you're initially looking at the CCTV footage and it seems to point quite strongly at one person, and that person is unrelated to the actual crime that's happened. However, she does actually know quite a lot about some people who are involved. So when you do catch up with her, it feels like a dead end, but at the same time, she's giving you a ton of extra clues, which will point you back in the right direction. So there's no need to add in additional red herrings. Like Keris said, the players will come up with their own.
I had years ago, I ran the 5th edition Master of Nyarlathotep, and I had one player, God love him, I could say this now because he passed away a few years ago. Devin would seize on some small random thing and just try to go with it. And I was like, no. There were times I would just have to say, no, come back to the rest of the PCs and sit down at the table with them. Because sometimes people just, like you were saying, Karis, they're people who, I don't know, it gives them a sense of agency or something that they've discovered something, or I don't know. It baffles me, but yeah, it definitely happens. All right. So we're getting kind of near the end here. I got some round robin questions, and originally we have 1 minute each. I think we've got enough time to devote a little more time to each of these. So, for each of you, give me your most common recommendation that you might give to a new keeper who's running an investigative horror game. And this could be a set of recommendations, not just one.
Start with a session 0, and keep it separate to your main game. So you want a thing where you have a separate session where you're creating your characters, which can be long and fiddly. And if people are not into doing maths, possibly not the most fun thing ever. You keep that separate to your campaign. You go through your expectations. You let them know about any trigger warnings that you might be using, any safety tools you're doing, and how they work. You find from them, if they're willing to or able to tell you their lines and veils, and what they prefer. So get to know each other first. Do that as a separate session, so so that you're fresh when you actually hit the investigative part. Don't try and do all that fiddly stuff before you then start on the fiction. That's fine.
I would follow on from what Keris said, and also building a +1 session at the end of the game as well. Just having a few minutes after every session to debrief and just, commiserate if somebody has died, or just go over what was your favorite things. And it can really help, because the story might be over for the investigators, but it's not necessarily over for the players. And I think also, particularly if you had the bad ending, or if there was a bit that didn't go quite as well, sometimes that moment of, oh, that's what we were meant to do, or oh, that's what was going on, that can be as satisfying as if you'd uncovered it in the game itself. And that sort of really can bring a group together and help them to gel. And just having that 10 minutes afterwards with a cup of tea and a biscuit or whatever, I think it can really elevate the social aspect of the gaming. And that's why we're all doing it, isn't it? We're here to have fun with our mates, aren't we? Really.
I would say that when you're preparing your scenario, make sure you've got a really solid grounding in what happened before the players get involved, because that's the one thing that you have complete control over. If you've got that firmly in your head, then whatever the players do from then onwards, you can probably improv around it, regardless of how weird they get.
For me, it is my most common piece of advice is to get skilled at working in the senses, all 5 senses, into your descriptions. And so this is particularly important in horror when you're really trying to get that immersive feel. And so is particularly with smell and taste, because it is a more invasive kind of sense, that when you get something in your nose or you get something in your mouth, like that sticks around, and it's not always your choice if you get to smell something or taste something. And so that can be really good at amping up the horror and creating that more immersive atmosphere. So that's a tip that I give to new GMs a lot.
I like to have players have a sense so strong that it actually leaves a taste in their mouth, that it gets transferred in. They hate that. They absolutely hate that. And I love it. Question about this. Do any of you use the horror contract from Cult Divinity Lost in other games? Do you know what I'm talking about? Can't
I
recommend this. Yeah, you want to talk about it?
Yeah, so the horror contract, I think it's just like laying out the like we're able to opt out at any time. Like we're gonna be talking about some intense topics. So you're allowed to opt out or tell the GM if you're not having fun for any reason, and then possibly go through lines and veils as well, I think, in that session. Um, so the answer to your question is it depends on if I'm at a table with people I've been playing with for 10 years or if I'm at a table with strangers. So if I'm at a table with strangers, I just always use the X card as an option. And then if anyone wants to share with me if there's off-limit topics, that's helpful to know, and I ask that at the beginning. And for those of you who don't know the X card, it's just an index card that you put in the middle of the table that has an X on it, and people can indicate or touch it if they get to a topic that's a no-go and not fun for them. And then you move past the scene and you don't go into further description. But with my group that I've been playing with for a decade plus, I know them very well, and we also know that we can always have open communication and can X out if we ever run into situations where we're uncomfortable.
One of the interesting things about the horror contract to me is it's the agreement that I'm going to be running a horror game and you are going to be playing in a horror game, and you know this going in. And here's the kind of horror I'm going to be running, and you know this going in. It doesn't negate X card, it doesn't negate lines of veils or anything like that, but it's that ground agreement that this is going to be a horror game. It is not going to be a heroic game necessarily. And it sets those expectations about horror in particular, and the relationship of the keeper and the players and the content altogether. I've never seen anything like that in another RPG. There probably is one somewhere, no doubt, but I've never seen it spelled out um, quite so well, really. So check it out if you haven't. If you haven't looked at, I know Sue knows about it.
Yeah,
The cult,
and
the
I've got
cult
it
runner. Yeah,
in front of
yeah,
me
you got it
right
in front
now.
of you. Yeah. Do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, like the first thing in it is know your players, and I think the whole discussion of lines and veils comes into that, because it's not just the things you don't want in the scenario, it's also the things you do want. If you really enjoy being scared by having spiders crawling all over you, tell your GM that.
Mm-hmm.
And so the rest of it is just full of really good advice just for generally running horror. I'd recommend anyone reads this regardless of what game they're actually running, if it's in the horror genre.
Sorry,
Yeah.
could you repeat what that is and where you can find it?
It's the horror contract from Cult Divinity Lost. Some of the other things, headers, dare to be unpleasant. And every time I read that, I immediately think of Scott Dorward for some reason. Also
No
create
comment. No
interesting
comment.
monsters. And say, well, one of the classic monsters of Cult Divinity Lost is the Nephirite, but you don't want a generic Nephirite. Like, so they are inspired by the Cenobites from Hellraiser, and if you think of the Cenobites, they are all different. And so look at the Cenobites, look at how different they are, how much thought has gone into their design, and make use of that to make your own monsters just that interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, again, highly recommend taking a look at that. It's honestly, I think it's worth, if you don't have the rule book, I think it's worth the price of the rule book alone, just to have that in hand, because it applies to so many of the other games we all run. Okay, now each of you give me your most uncommon recommendation, and this time for all keepers or GMs or whatever you want to say.
For me, I think it's be willing to lean into what your players think is fun, even if it's off track with what you originally thought or was originally planned, because that can lead to a lot of really fun adventures. So don't feel too constrained at the table because you might end up going in a completely different direction because of some off comments that they're making at the table or assumptions they're making. So yeah, don't be afraid to have a little fun and just wing it.
Yeah, sometimes sure, why not? If they've come up with a detail that enriches the
Yeah.
story or motivations for an NPC that you didn't write that way, and maybe it's not in the scenario as written, but if it fits, go with it. Why not? You're creating a story together, even if it's, something which thousands of people around the world have played over many, many years, something like Master of Nyarlathotep or Horror on the Orient Express. You can still make it your own, and you can make it your groups, and you create your own sort of canon really with it, and then you can use that in later adventures as well. So yeah, don't be afraid of the sure, why not? I would totally agree with you.
Something I do in a lot of my scenarios is when I write the pre-gen characters, there are gaps in them for the players to fill in. Let's say the cult game that I ran this afternoon, at the end of each background, there is a question. You've been asked to bring one personal item with you to this event, along with all your standard traveling gear. What is it? And then I got some really interesting things which I could then incorporate into the scenario, and which ended up taking certain parts of it in a direction I wasn't expecting. I'd say in addition to the surprises that I get, it helps the players feel more invested in their character because, well, it's a pre-gen, but they've put something of themselves into it as well.
I think the Brindlewood games do that exceptionally well, where you have people saying, so what's an object that your character owns, and you pick it for somebody else, and it really helps sort of make those characters vivid. I'm presuming Matrons of Mystery does something along the same lines. I haven't played that one yet, but I really want to. So do they use that as well in your game, Sue?
No, it doesn't really do the equipment part
Okay.
of the Brindlewood Bay.
Well, I love that part of Brindlewood, so it can be useful.
Yeah, my answer would be pretty much to back up what Lydia and Leslie says, because my big piece of advice is this to a keeper is that the game isn't really about you. Keep that in mind. You're not directing a play. You're not even being a storyteller to an audience. The game is about the players. It's about their experience. So you might have written the greatest plot in the world or have the most sort of wonderful idea about your jump scares and your special effects and things like that. What matters is what works for the players, and if they take it in a different direction, you go with that. If they want to explore sort of just aspects that you hadn't thought of, improv, go with it. They're going to have their fun, and at some point you've got to sort of take a Buddhist attitude and say, I put everything to this, but at some point I've got to let it go. It belongs to the players.
Yeah, your game, don't let your game be your darling because they are here to murder it.
Yeah, yes, that's a really good way of putting it.
That's why they showed up at your table, was to commit murder. Okay, so we are just about ready to wrap up. Each of you, tell us again what you do and where we can find you.
So I'm Leslie. Thank you for having me on the panel. My final advice, I guess, is we've given a ton of really awesome things in this panel, but at the end of the day, don't stress about it and just try it out and have fun. That is the most important thing. Everyone is there so that you have a good time. So don't stress, learn what you can, practice, get better with time, and it'll all be good. You can find me on my YouTube channel, XPLovecat. And if you're working on any cool projects, tabletop role-playing games, or writing fiction books, I'd love to have a chat.
I'm Keris McDonald. I work for Chaosium. Thank you for having me on this terrific panel. It's been really interesting. Lots of good ideas. Now I want to go look at all the videos for the previous panels as well. I can be found on Facebook because I am not particularly brilliant at social media, but mostly I can just be found at conventions and doing Chaosium stuff.
And I'm Lydia. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here at the weekend with good friends. I've really enjoyed both panels I've been on, and this has been a lot of fun. So thank you so much, Heather, for running it. Thank you, Miranda, for all the behind the scenes technical wizardry. And it's been lovely to talk with everybody in the rest of the panel. You can find me at the Actual Play podcast, Lightless Beacons, which I co-manage. Come and join the Discord. Come and say hello, and come and listen to our current campaign, which is The Moonchild by Paul Fricker. You can also find me at the Miskatonic Playhouse, where I'm a regulars cast member. Really active Discord there as well. It's lovely to chat to people, and I really hope to get to know some of you a bit better in the future. So thanks again.
I'm Sue, and I think my final words for everyone is that the best thing about running investigative horror is the point where the players put all the clues together. And that is just such a satisfying moment for a GM. So you can find me on Blue Sky, Blogspot, and Discord, all under the name Savage Spiel. If you look up my real name, Sue Savage, on DriveThruRPG, you'll find some of the things I've written, and there is more to come. And if you want to see me on an actual play, I've done actual plays on Chambers of Roleplay and on Symphony Entertainment, and I've got one coming out soon from the Illusion HorrorCon.
That concludes our panel on managing information and player attention. Many thanks to our panelists for their ideas and advice, and thanks once again to the good friends of Jackson Elias for hosting this weekend's event. Visit blasphemoustomes.com for more information. Thank you, everyone.